It is 3 o'clock. I will call the November 20th, 2019 meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Lee Peoples.
Here.
Anthony Black.
Here.
Jorge Charnico.
Here.
Matt Guillory. Tyler Holmes. Sarah Miller.
Here.
Toon Nguyen.
Here.
Marcus Uday. Here. And James Varnum. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item up is the approval of the minutes of our October 23rd, 2019 meeting. Commissioners, do we have any corrections or changes to these minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion for approval?
I'll move to approve.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are approved. We have no cases withdrawn. We have no continuance requests. The consent docket, we have UDCA 19-35. Is there any commissioner or member of the public that would like to discuss this item? No discussion among the members of the commission on this? Then I would ask for a motion.
I'll move to approve the consent docket.
We have a motion.
I second.
With a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. We'll now move on to items for individual consideration. Item 6A, UDCA 19-34 at 804 and 808 Northwest 23rd Street.
This item involves two properties on the south side of Northwest 23rd Street, just west of Chartel, and they are two existing residential structures. The item before you today is a renovation of those two structures and the construction of a carport facility at the rear of the property off the alley. Basically, they replaced the windows and the doors on both structures and poured some new concrete landings at the front of the building. The most significant thing that was done was that both structures were previously unpainted brick, and they've both been painted black, and that is counter to our guideline in the building conservation and renovation guidelines that we have. So I'm not sure how this would have played out if the application had been submitted prior to the painting being done, but at this point, what's done is done, and there's not much we can do about it. We think that asking them to remove the paint would probably be more detrimental to the building than painting it in the first place. So we have recommended approval of this application for the consideration of the commission.
Any questions for staff?
Is it noted in your, I realize it's noted that this would, that it's been painted without a formal approval, but can it be noted that no matter how this turns out today, that we're not setting precedent by any action that we take in regards to this, or just some kind of notation in the formal document?
Yes, in your approval or disapproval, you could note unique circumstances.
Okay. Is the applicant present? Please sign in and give us your name and address.
Yeah, Jared Smith.
Do you have anything you'd like to say or any comments you'd like to make?
No, I'll just answer and field any questions that you guys might have.
Any questions from the commission?
And if you want to address the painting of the building, prior to painting the structure, the reason for, if you actually check out the structure, and I think we actually did send in some photos of that too, the brick on both buildings. Both buildings had sit vacant for over 5 years on 23rd Street. So the lady who had previously on them had started a renovation on them, had bricked in several windows on the 808 structure, and therefore the brick one didn't match, and then we had to actually take brick down on several corners, and we did a substantial amount of brickwork to both buildings just to make them actually usable structures again, and therefore we, knowing that we couldn't do that, decided that since the brick and the mortar wasn't matching whatsoever, to go ahead and paint the structures.
Any questions or comments from the commission?
Typically, I would not be in favor at all, and thank you for the backstory on
Yeah, no problem.
how we got to where we are, because that helps me in understanding it.
Sure.
I'm not a fan of painting unpainted brick, specifically for the reasons that are cited. That said, I also understand fully that taking the brick back to an unpainted would probably look awful and damage the brick that's underneath it. So, I mean, I'm in favor of granting or recommending the case, but I.
Sure, and like I said, we didn't really even, I did not, and we should have looked because we do a lot of historic stuff too, but the building next door was painted, so we just assumed that there was no issue with painting brick, so we went ahead and did it. So, apologies, and now noted for future projects. But yeah, taking the paint off would damage the pretty, the brick's not in the greatest shape anyway, or it wasn't prior to.
Other comments or questions from the commission? Any member of the public would like to speak to this? Unless there's any further discussion, I would entertain a motion on this item.
I'll move to approve the application on the basis that the project meets the regulations and guidelines of the Urban Design Overlay District Zoning Ordinance as referenced in section C and D of the staff report.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that item is approved.
Thank you.
Now move on to item 7A, other business. Item 7A is SPUD 1162. This is 1620 North Blackwelder Avenue.
Yes, this is an application to rezone a portion of a previously approved SPUD to a new SPUD. The original SPUD was approved, I think, back in 2017, I believe. And the issue before us today with this application is that the two-story residential structure at 1620 North Blackwelder, they're proposing to use it as an Airbnb, a temporary lodging facility. It faces onto North Blackwelder, and at the time of the previous SPUD, this particular land use did not exist because we didn't have the regulations in place for Airbnb regulations. So now that those land uses are in place, and they were not included on the listing of uses that are permitted under the previous SPUD, they've come in to modify this smaller portion of the PUD to allow those uses. So it would apply to this residential structure at 1620 North Blackwelder, as well as an Airstream trailer that we're proposing to add to the site just to the north of this building in this interior courtyard area behind this fence. So typically uses aren't really specifically much of a design issue for our staff, so we're recommending approval to the commission for a recommendation to the Planning Commission on this project. We're prepared to respond to any questions the commission may have.
Yeah, I had a question for you. So the Airstream trailer, are there any prohibitions or regulations about what might be called a mobile home in this design district?
No, not really. But the Airstream trailer that they've talked about is already on site in the parking lot to the north, to the south of this building. But you're right, there's nothing guaranteed that would be the trailer that actually gets used, and no prohibitions as of this time in the SPUD document that would outlaw like an RV.
But is there anything in the underlying zoning
Campers that people are staying in are not ordinarily allowed in a lot of zoning districts, but that's why they're adding the lodging accommodations campgrounds in this SPD. Like, for example, you can't have it in down DBD or DTD1.
Any other questions for staff? Is the applicant present? Please sign in and give us your name and address, please.
Jeff Struble, 1916 Northwest 18th. And we do have in our SPUD that specific trailer, a 26-foot Airstream. So we are specific to that, and that's what we're going to be using there. So we did specify what was going to be there. Trying to have a kind of a neat, kind of whimsical little addition to our courtyard there. And people are looking for different neat things to do in the city, so we're trying to add some fun stuff in the Plaza District.
Any questions for the applicant? Is there anyone here that would like to speak to this item? Commissioners, do you have any comments or additional questions about this item? I had a question. I know that this home sharing ordinance, it came through us, it came through the other design review boards, and I know that it was controversial in some other districts, and this, having the homeowner reside in the home sharing unit, I think was a compromise to appease some people in some other districts, and so I just was wondering, staff, did we hear anything from Plaza District Association or any neighbors or anything over there questioning this sort of getting around the home sharing ordinance with the SPUD?
Well, it's not really getting around it. It's just adding it as a use from the ordinance that created that use unit classification. So it's making that use legal for this SPUD because it's not listed as a permitted use in the existing SPUD. So they're just adding it from, and it's going to be in compliance with the regulations that apply to the home sharing.
And they're also, because they're adding commercial lodging as a use, that gets away from the requirement that the property owner inhabit it.
All right. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Any other questions from the commission? Well, if there's no other discussion or questions, I would entertain a motion on this, and we would be recommending this for approval to the Planning Commission.
I'll make a motion to provide a recommendation of approval to the Planning Commission on the basis that the project meets the regulations and guidelines of the Urban Design Overlay District Zoning Ordinance as referenced in Section C of the staff report.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been motioned and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that is recommended for approval.
Thank you.
To the Planning Commission. Next item on the agenda is item 7B, PUD 1741 at 4545 North Lincoln Boulevard. Ask staff to give us a report on this.
This is an application for a site that is on the west side of North Lincoln Boulevard in the recently established Lincoln Boulevard Corridor Overlay Subdistrict of the Urban Design District. It's just south of Northeast 46th Street, and it entails a rather large parking lot at the rear, small parking lot at the front, and two existing office buildings that are on the site. We have reviewed this application, and in our staff report outlined our concerns with respect to the proposed language in the master design statement for the SPUD, or excuse me, for the PUD. And overall, we have some concerns, primarily the primary one being that the current language in the master design statement would remove this site from the recently established overlay district, and we do not feel that would be appropriate. We feel it's we're perfectly capable of accommodating the proposed uses. We did add multifamily residential as a permitted use in the overlay, so that fits in with what they're trying to do with the site. We do believe that much of what's on the ground today can remain in place without and continue to be used without having any conflicts with the zoning district. But we do believe, however, that new improvements on the site, such as new buildings that would front on Lincoln or other improvements to the parking lot, could and should be subject to the rules and regulations in the new overlay district, and still subject to requiring a certificate of approval and coming through either staff review for administrative cases or to the commission for commission level approvals. So that's the big primary issue that we feel should be changed in the language of the master design statement going forward, to ensure that there's no language remaining in the master design statement that would remove it or that would supersede the overlay. Secondarily, there are sidewalk regulations in the overlay that require a 6-foot minimum sidewalk and specify a parkway between the curb and the sidewalk, and then more landscaping behind the sidewalk. And the sidewalk regulations that are in the SPUD or in the PUD do not match with those, and we feel that that needs to be changed as well as a condition of approval. Parking lot regulations, as I mentioned, there's quite a bit of parking on this property, a large parking lot in the rear, which we don't have any ideas what their future proposals are for land use on that site. But we have a large parking lot in the northwest corner of the front portion and a smaller parking lot area in the front. And currently, they do not comply with the regulations that were set forth in the overlay district for setback and screening of parking lots, particularly those fronting on Lincoln Boulevard. And we just feel that the language within the master design statement needs to be modified to ensure that as future planning efforts progress on this project, that those design efforts would accommodate and entail the current overlay district standards for parking lots. Under development guidelines, we have guidelines that talk about concentrating mass and height at the corner and street walls formed along the frontage of Lincoln Boulevard. Clearly, the two existing buildings do not satisfy those regulations, and we're fine with that. We're not trying to apply those standards to these buildings as long as they remain in place as is. Use is being changed. It's not an issue. However, we are concerned that if someone were to choose to build a building in front of these buildings on the Lincoln frontage, that they should comply with these guidelines as well. There are, I think, pictures in your packet that show the frontage of the property with respect to the lack of street trees in certain segments along the frontage. And street trees are a guideline that indicate that street trees should be installed along the frontage. And we're recommending language in the master design statement that requires compliance with those guidelines as well. So in summary, we are recommending to the Commission that you provide a recommendation of approval to the Planning Commission for this PUD. However, we're doing so only on the basis that the list of conditions A through I would be applied to that document and those revisions made prior to going to Planning Commission. And we're prepared to respond to any questions the Commission may have.
Okay. Any questions from the Commission for staff?
Good afternoon. David Box, 522 Colcord Drive, here on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Dick Tannenbaum, who's also here, as well as Cindy Morello and Eric Gummerson. So this is an exciting project, one that I've been working on behalf of Mr. Tannenbaum for several years. We went and rezoned the Half Moon building several years ago, and now what started this process was the need to convert this office building into additional multifamily. So the reason you see the legal description is a bit strange and doesn't encompass this is because that is already already zoned. It is not in the overlay. So it's a bit strange that the overlay is being applied to part of the property, but not the other part. We did meet with staff several times, understand their concerns. I think there's probably an agreement to be made where we can agree to some of it. But one of the problems and concerns that we've had is this is a tough project anyway, so any additional regulation and requirement that would require us to come through the CA process creates problems. But with that said, we can talk briefly about the conditions that staff has laid out in your staff report. So generally, condition A, we can agree to. I think that's fine. All it's going to add is that we have R4 and the Lincoln Boulevard Corridor Subdistrict overlay, as well as R4 in the case of a conflict, that the overlay would supersede. B, we're fine with. C, we're fine with, except I think it's incomplete. If we're going to take out the second paragraph of section 9.1, it leaves a portion of the first paragraph with a sentence that makes no sense. And so it would need to be the second paragraph as well as the second sentence of the first paragraph, because otherwise the first paragraph ends with, in the event the existing structures are demolished, any new structure shall comply with the following, and then there's nothing following. So assuming staff does want something to apply, I suggest that we take out the second sentence of the first paragraph. With that said, one question we've got is, what are the building materials that would be required pursuant to the overlay?
Well, they're in the urban design overlay handout. Essentially, it's masonry, glass, stone. I think there's wood is allowed, but it's...
Architectural metals.
Yes, architectural metals. It's pretty straightforward, a lot like what you see in downtown.
So I think we got there anyways with the second paragraph, but we're happy to do that. But I think condition needs to be modified to be the second paragraph and the second sentence of the first paragraph. D.
Staff agrees with that. We talked about it yesterday.
Yeah. So on D, we're fine with this. The understanding we have with staff is they believe, and we're waiting, but they believe that everything we show here is able to be permitted, granted through a CA with what we got, with what we want to do. And so with the caveat that assuming that what we want to do is allowed under the overlay, then we're good with it. In the event that it's not, then we will be pushing to put this language back in. But at the moment, we have, I think, relative assurance from staff that what we're asking for is, in fact, going to be permitted pursuant to the overlay.
Yeah, I'll elaborate on that a little bit. The east half of the project, the portion with the existing Lincoln Plaza office building, right now today, with no rezoning and with being in the overlay, we can permit it because the overlay added multifamily residential as a use unit. And we've reviewed the renovation plans, and it's extremely minor exterior alterations. So we expect the CA application any second, and per our pre-review, there's no issues with it. So that's to illustrate a little bit of what David was talking about.
So, and then on condition E, it's to the sidewalks, and we do agree with that. On condition F, so this deals with the parking lot. You've got this parking lot as well as that. This one is the primary concern. And so what staff has asked for is that we meet the requirements of the overlay, except we should be able to do restriping. And speaking with Ms. Chronister, I believe she's comfortable in adding and resurfacing so that we can restripe and resurface without coming into compliance with the overlay. So if the commission would be willing to grant that, we could be willing to accept condition F with the additional language. And then we agree to the rest of them, G, H, and I. One thing I do need, I guess, note for the record, because I'm going to have to go modify the PUD based upon all of this, is the parking lot to the west that is not in the overlay now. I'm going to have to create a separate tract within the PUD to make clear that that is not going to be subject to anything pursuant to the overlay. It's not in it now. It doesn't front Lincoln. I don't think that's going to be a matter that's controversial to this commission, but I want to make sure it's clear on the record that all of these things we agree to are not going to apply to that piece to the west.
Questions from the commission?
To summarize, you have, with respect to item D, as long as there's nothing that comes up during the permitting process, you're fine. And with respect to item F, restriping and resurfacing, as long as you can do that, then that would bring you into a level of compliance that you're acceptable with. All other items, you're okay with.
Yes. Assuming a permit gets issued.
So on item D, if there is an issue that comes back for the revision of the PUD, would that come back to planning, or would that come back to us, or how would that be accomplished?
A revision to the PUD? Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, PUD, so the ordinance handles minor administrative amendments to PUDs. It's an administrative process that doesn't go for a public hearing. If you don't meet the threshold with the administrative amendment process, then it goes back to a rezoning that presumably would be required to come before this board.
Okay. Other questions from the commission? Is there anyone, any member of the public that would like to speak to this item? Any additional discussion among commissioners? I have a comment for staff. I think it was about a year ago that we approved the overlay, or give or take. And if I remember the history correctly, we were approached by the state of Oklahoma to do something, and it seems like, well, last month we had a long discussion about the PUD for the grocery store, and now another one. The staff think this is fairly normal given the size of this and the newness, or did we make some missteps when we did the overlay?
Yeah, I'm not sure you're right. I thought, well, we were approached by the commissioners of the land office and the state management enterprise services to do this in the first place. We had the council person at the time, their support. We had a large stakeholder group, which many people here were on it. We had multiple meetings, mail-outs with adjacent property owners. I just assume it's one of those things until you start working with it, you know, even though the impact has been explained to all these groups many times, that, like I said, once you start getting into it, you just don't realize. But hopefully this is atypical. And again, on at least the east half of this property, staff believes that it didn't need to be rezoned because the overlay actually added something they needed, which was the use.
And it's a very large project, and you would expect, you know, if there are going to be some changes, a project of this scope may be the one that needs them.
Right. And the Mr. Boggs had referenced that the property just south of this, the arced building, it was not included because in the overlay we didn't include any existing PUDs or SPUDs. But this was a straight zoned property, so it got included.
And I think picking up on what Lisa said, we've had a lot of dialogue with the applicant on this, and what she said is correct. We believe that the overlay would accommodate this project without a PUD. We just believe that for the safety and security of the property owner with respect to items like nonconforming structures and nonconforming uses, they feel they have a greater comfort level having the PUD in place to protect those interests.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll also point out we've, in the last really 6 or 8 months, we've had applications for several new projects and remodel projects where people were not, I don't know if anybody was initially aware of the zoning until they got to the permit desk, but we reach out to them, make them aware. Everybody we've talked to so far has come to the table with trying to meet the regs and guidelines. So I think it is catching on in terms of understanding.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions from the commission?
I do want to applaud the applicant on actually working with staff to try and reach this compromise of staying within the guidelines of the overlay, because it seems like we're constantly being requested to have PUDs and SPUDs that supersede and get them extracted from the overlay, and that's something that we've been working to not allow to occur. So the fact that the compromise has already occurred and that wasn't the discussion of the day, I think that's to be applauded.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Is staff okay with all the changes that we're going through, and would we be all right in formulating the minutes? Okay. Any other discussion on this item? I would entertain a motion for recommendation.
I'll make a motion to provide a recommendation of approval to the Planning Commission for the request to rezone the subject site from C3, I2, and Urban Design Overlay District / Lincoln Boulevard Corridor Subdistrict to PUD 1741 with the conditions as listed in the staff report, with the consideration that under item D, that there are no specific items that would restrict a permit and a CA, and that under item F, that restriping and resurfacing meets the requirements as listed by the staff.
Item C.
On C, it's the last sentence of the first paragraph needs to be deleted.
And on item C, that the last sentence of the first paragraph be deleted. Thank you.
Can I also add something? Like on F, didn't we want to do the additional restriping and resurfacing as well?
He mentioned that.
Oh, did he mention that?
Got that.
Got it.
Okay, we have a motion with several conditions here. Any discussion before we have a second, so I'm sure that everybody's clear on where we are? Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. That is approved. Now we move on to item 8, communications. Is there anyone in the audience or any commissioner that would like to discuss any of these communication items? Next would be any comments from planning department staff? Any? Oh, go ahead.
One, I've been promoted to assistant planning director, so this may be my last meeting with you. We're going to hire somebody for my position, and I'm going to remain also the division manager until that happens. I'm not sure I'll be able to make every meeting, but certainly I'll stay engaged in the case review.
Well, congratulations, but it's a bit of a loss for us with all of your institutional memory, but please pass it on to the person that you hire. So, comments from commissioners? I sort of intruded on that with that last one.
Did you want to make note about the commissioner training?
Yes, commissioner training. Everybody should have received a save the date for January 31st. It will be at the Civic Center, Hall of Mirrors, and we'll send out more information as we get closer to the date.
If there are no other comments from the commission, our next meeting date, December 18, 2019, and with that, we will be adjourned.